Alrighty guys, welcome back to another online lesson. Today we're going to look at environmental politics in Australia. This is 3.2.4. So earlier in the year we looked at the 60s and 70s and how that really shaped and changed Australian political parties' stances on the environment. We started to see some of those big environmental policies come into play. So since then, public awareness around the environment and the need for it to be protected has continued to grow, and as a result has continued to put pressure on our Australian political parties to include environmental policies. We're going to have a look at the main Australian political parties now, just look at the big three. There's a really awesome link here you can click on because a lot of young people aren't really aware of their own political stance. So if you jump on that website and have a look, you can take a quiz and it will kind of give you this graph and show you where you sit in terms of who you should follow and who you align with the most in Australian political parties. First one we're going to look at are the Liberals. So the Liberals are the centre right of the Australian political spectrum, and they really try and uphold traditional practices and promote free enterprise. And they're quite conservative. So that's Scott Morrison. He's the current Prime Minister and the current leader of the Liberal Party. The next party that a lot of us are very familiar with is the Labor Party. So the Labor Party is the oldest Australian political party, and they promote things such as social justice and environmental issues, right? And they're on the centre left of the spectrum. The current national leader for the Labor Party is Anthony Albanese. The last one we're going to look at are the Australian Greens Party. They're a left-wing political party and they are very, very heavily environmentally focused, as you're probably already aware. And they were involved in the Franklin River conflict. And moving forward, Adam Bandt is the current Greens political party leader for Australia. So now I'm just going to flick through these next few slides. It's a great idea for you to stop and have a look at these slides yourself. Choose maybe one or two areas you really want to focus on, because last year in the exam, they explicitly asked for the students to name a political party and then to name an environmental policy of that party. So it's a good idea to have at least two of these areas covered and look at the three political parties and their stances on these environmental issues or policies. So climate change and greenhouse gas emissions is the first thing we're going to look at. I've updated these this year. So the really important thing to understand about policies and the government is that they're ever changing. So if you're referring to the targets in the textbook, you're referring to old political stances and targets, and you will not be marked correctly for the exam. So please refer to these here in the PowerPoint as I've updated them this year. So for each of the following slides, you're going to see that I've got three boxes with each political party and their stance on the topic. So for climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, the Labor Party want 45% reduction on the 2005 levels by 2030, whereas the Liberal Party want a 26 to 28% reduction by 2030 on the 2005 levels. Renewable energy, most students use renewable energy in last year's exam because they're quite easy to remember. So the Greens want 100% renewables by 2030. Whereas the Labor want 50% renewables by 2030. You can see why a lot of people went for this area. It's super straightforward and really, really easy to recall. I've also got policies outlining mining, which I'm not going to talk through. You can have a look at the PowerPoint in your own time. Gas as well. This is the big one to take away from this area of study of 3.2.4, and it's the Victorian Environmental Assessment Council, or the VEAC as they are known. So when Henry Bolt was head of the Liberal government back in 1971, he formed the Land Control Council. They then later became known as the Environmental Control Council, and they are now known as the Victorian Environmental Assessment Council, or the VEAC. So this was pioneered and kind of came about in the 70s and has been ever evolving in Victoria's political party. So the VEAC, this is the important part. So who they are, what they are is it's a council made up of 5 members, including a chairperson. They have to have experience or expert knowledge related to the management of public land and natural resources. Their role, and this is where a lot of people get quite confused. So the council works for the Victorian government. The Victorian government will hire them, okay, to conduct investigations. So the Victorian government says, all right, I want you to conduct an investigation into, if we were to put a amusement park on the Frankston foreshore, what kind of impacts is that going to have on the public land and the environment there? So the VEAC, they then go away, they conduct their private investigations, and they're impartial, all right? So they're just looking at the real nitty-gritty on the public land and the environment. They don't support the government, they don't support other parties or other people or users or groups. They just really look into the facts. All right, so once what they do, they go, they conduct their investigation as asked by the Victorian government, and they come back with a report on that environment. This is straight from the textbook, and it gives you kind of a timeline of events of what happens with the VEAC. So the government propose about the use of the public land. They say, this is what we want to do here. And they say to the VEAC, can you please go and conduct your research for us into this proposal? The VEAC asks public and interest groups to make submissions in regard to the proposal so other people can have their input. And then they could then, after they do their investigation and ask the public or interest groups for input, they conduct a really detailed report and they say, this is what we found and this is what we believe. They then present that report in Parliament and it's discussed by Australian politicians. The report then recommends, the report recommendations provide the basis for informed decisions to be made. So the VEAC could say, we believe that through our investigations, that if you were to create an amusement park on the Frankston foreshore, these would be the impacts on the local environment. All right, that then goes and is discussed in Parliament. That does not mean that if the VEAC finds lots of negative outcomes in the proposal, the government body is then, Victorian government body is then not obliged to go and follow their report. They could then still build the amusement park on the Frankston foreshore, okay? So the report kind of recommends things and it's done through expert knowledge and investigation, but it is not the final say. The Victorian government still have the final say on the public land. Hopefully you guys have an understanding now of the VEAC, but to work on your knowledge further, you need to go onto the VEAC website and you need to find a current or recent investigation. And I want you to research the process and find out everything you can and create me an A4 document outlining what the investigation is or was, what the VEAC found, and then what came about the investigation if it was a past one, or what is happening if it's currently being looked at by the Victorian government. The key knowledge and skills here, like I said, you need to understand, have a basic understanding of environmental policies in Australia, okay? And you need to know the role of the VEAC. Last year's exam, like I said to you earlier, asked students for current environmental policies and the party behind them, all right? So in that PowerPoint, you need to select 2 areas that you really find interesting, hopefully. So maybe you want to go with renewable energy and mining. Just be aware that if you do renewable energy and greenhouse gas emissions or climate change, you can sometimes get confused between the two because they're very similar. So try and find a point of difference in the 2 that you choose, and you'll need to know the political party and their stance or their policy around that environmental issue. And then the 2017 exam had a question about the VEAC in it as well. So please understand that they work for they're hired by the Victorian government to conduct investigations and provide a report on public land management, okay? Once you've had a look and you've done your note taking, I look forward to seeing you in our next Teams meeting to discuss what you've found.